Lila lived in a peaceful neighborhood where every house looked bright and clean. The streets were quiet, and the trees along the sidewalks made the area feel fresh and calm. Every morning, neighbors would greet each other with a smile or a wave. Lila loved this neighborhood because it was safe, friendly, and full of small surprises like birds singing or flowers blooming along the fences. Lila was a cheerful woman who liked to spend time outdoors. She had many hobbies, but recently she had discovered a love for archery. She had bought a small foam-tipped bow and arrows that were completely safe. She enjoyed the feeling of holding the bow, taking a careful aim, and letting the arrow fly to hit her target. It gave her a sense of focus and calm like nothing else. On a sunny afternoon, Lila decided it was a perfect time to practice. She set up her target in the backyard, making sure it was far from the street. She carefully arranged the foam arrows and started aiming. Each shot was a little better than the last, and she smiled at her progress. The birds chirped around her, and the gentle breeze made the afternoon feel peaceful. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan, the president of the neighborhood HOA, was tending her small garden. Mrs. Callahan liked rules and order. She kept a close eye on everyone and everything. She believed a perfect neighborhood required strict attention to detail. When she saw Lila holding the bow, her eyes widened. "Oh no, she has a gun," Mrs. Callahan shouted quietly to herself, even though she could clearly see the bow was safe. Her mind raced with worries. What if something went wrong? What if someone got hurt? Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and called the police. She wanted help immediately. Meanwhile, Lila was completely unaware of the growing concern across the street. She carefully nocked an arrow and pulled it back, feeling the soft resistance of the bowstring. Her focus was only on hitting the target, and she didn't notice the flurry of activity her neighbor had started. Within a few minutes, a police car slowly drove into the neighborhood and stopped in front of Lila's house. 2 officers stepped out, their faces serious, scanning the area for danger. Lila turned when she heard the siren fade and waved politely. "Hello? Is everything okay?" she asked, smiling. She held up her bow to show it was harmless. The first officer spoke cautiously. "Ma'am, we received a report that you have a gun." His tone was careful, showing concern but no hostility. Lila laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Oh no, this isn't a gun. It's a foam bow for archery. I'm just practicing my hobby." The officers exchanged glances, trying to understand. They could see the bow was safe, but they were trained to be careful. Their eyes scanned the backyard, checking the distance from the street and making sure no one else was near. Just then, another figure appeared on the sidewalk. Major Higgins, a retired Army officer, was walking his dog. He was well known in the neighborhood for teaching safe self-defense and archery lessons. Seeing Lila with the bow, he smiled warmly. "Hello, Lila. Practicing again, I see," he said. The officers immediately recognized him. Major Higgins had trained with them in local safety programs before. They straightened their posture, giving him full attention and respect. Mrs. Callahan, still standing in her garden, could not believe her eyes. What had started as a small misunderstanding was quickly turning into something extraordinary. The officers were looking serious, but also alert and respectful toward Major Higgins. Lila lowered her bow slightly and waved. She felt a little embarrassed. She had never imagined that practicing her hobby could cause such a stir. She hoped the situation would calm down soon. Major Higgins took a step forward, raising his hand slightly. The officers immediately snapped to attention and saluted. "Yes, Commander," they said in unison. Lila blinked in surprise. She had never seen anything like this before. Even Mrs. Callahan looked shocked, her mouth slightly open. The moment was unusual, but it also made Lila feel safe. The situation that had started as a potential problem now felt secure. She realized that having experienced guidance in the neighborhood could turn even a misunderstanding into a peaceful and controlled moment. Lila smiled, nodded to Major Higgins, and carefully placed her bow down. She realized that today was going to be a story the neighborhood would remember for a long time. What started as a quiet afternoon hobby had unexpectedly become a lesson in respect, safety, and community understanding. The quiet neighborhood, which had always felt safe and peaceful, suddenly became a little tense. Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, stood in her garden, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her phone. She had called the police moments ago, convinced that Lila was holding a dangerous weapon. Now she watched as the police officers saluted Major Higgins and took a step back, clearly following his lead. Her eyes widened. She had never seen anything like this before. Lila, still holding her foam bow, looked from Mrs. Callahan to the officers and then to Major Higgins. She didn't understand why anyone would think she was dangerous. She tried to calm her nerves by focusing on the foam arrow in her hand. It was soft, safe, and meant for fun. "I really don't understand," she said politely. "I'm just practicing archery. Nothing else." Major Higgins walked closer, smiling warmly at her. "Lila, it's perfectly safe. Don't worry about it," he said in a calm, steady voice. "These officers know that. They just want to make sure everyone is safe." The officers nodded, their hands resting lightly on their belts. Even though they were trained to respond to emergencies, they had learned to trust Major Higgins. The unusual situation had shifted from a potential problem to a simple misunderstanding. Lila felt relief wash over her. Mrs. Callahan, however, wasn't ready to let go just yet. She stepped out of her garden, her voice trembling with worry. "But she had a bow. What if it were dangerous?" she said, glancing nervously at the officers. Lila gently placed the bow on the grass. "It's only foam. No one could get hurt," she explained calmly. "I always make sure to practice in my backyard, away from the street." Major Higgins turned to Mrs. Callahan. "I understand your concern," he said kindly. "But it's important to check the facts before panicking. Lila has been practicing archery safely for weeks. I supervise all her practice sessions, and nothing unsafe has ever happened." The officers relaxed slightly, standing a little straighter now. They looked at Lila's setup, a small target made of cardboard, arrows that were soft and flexible, and a neatly trimmed lawn. It was clear there was no danger. Mrs. Callahan shifted uncomfortably. She realized she had jumped to conclusions. Her worry had caused unnecessary panic in the neighborhood. I overreacted," she admitted softly. Lila smiled gently. "It's okay. Sometimes people worry too much. I just want everyone to be safe too." Meanwhile, some neighbors had started to come outside, curious about the commotion. They peeked from behind curtains and fences, whispering to each other. Some laughed quietly when they saw the foam bow, realizing that the danger was really just a harmless hobby. Others looked at Major Higgins with admiration. His presence had instantly changed the mood, turning tension into calm. One of the neighbors, Mr. Lopez, stepped forward. "So nothing bad is happening?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, nothing at all," Major Higgins said with a small nod. "Lila is just practicing archery. It's safe, controlled, and fun." The officers, still standing at attention, lowered their hands from their belts. They smiled politely at the neighbors who were starting to understand what had happened. Even Mrs. Callahan took a deep breath and nodded. She felt a little embarrassed, but also relieved that no one was hurt. Lila picked up her bow again, just to show that everything was under control. "See, all safe," she said, aiming carefully at her target. She let an arrow fly and it hit the center. The soft thump of the foam arrow made a small sound, and the neighbors chuckled softly. Mrs. Callahan stepped closer, still unsure, but more relaxed now. "I suppose I should have looked before calling," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." Lila smiled warmly. "It's okay. This can be a lesson for all of us. Sometimes we worry too much and forget to check the facts first." Major Higgins nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Today could have been a stressful moment, but we all learned something. Safety is important, but so is calm thinking." The officers, still smiling politely, looked around at the neighbors and gave a small wave. "All clear here," one of them said. "Everything is fine." The tension that had filled the street just a few minutes ago began to fade. The quiet neighborhood returned to its usual calm, though now with a funny story that everyone would remember. Lila continued her practice while the neighbors whispered and laughed quietly about the foam bow incident. Even Mrs. Callahan shook her head with a small smile, realizing she had created a story the neighborhood would talk about for weeks. The quiet neighborhood, which had just started returning to normal, suddenly felt the hum of attention again. A police car rolled slowly down the street, its tires crunching lightly on the pavement. Two officers stepped out, moving with a careful but professional stride. Their expressions were serious, reflecting the responsibility they felt to protect the community. Lila, still holding her foam bow, noticed the car stop near her house. She raised her hand politely. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and friendly. The first officer, a tall man with a kind but cautious face, spoke carefully. "Ma'am, we received a report that you might have a gun. Can you tell us what's happening?" Lila laughed lightly, hoping to ease the tension. "No guns here," she said, showing the soft foam bow and the target in her backyard. "This is just for archery practice. I always make sure it's safe and far from the street." The officers exchanged a quick glance, slightly confused but still alert. They had been trained to respond carefully, and they took every report seriously. Even seeing the bow, they could not ignore the call. Just then, Major Higgins appeared on the sidewalk. The retired Army officer had a commanding presence, yet a kind smile. He walked toward the officers and nodded. "Good afternoon, officers," he said. "This is Lila, and she's practicing archery safely under my supervision." The officers immediately straightened, recognizing Higgins from community safety programs. His presence brought an unusual authority to the situation. Even in casual conversation, his tone demanded attention and respect. Mrs. Callahan, standing a little distance away, could hardly believe what she was seeing. She had called the authorities in a panic, expecting a dangerous situation, and now everyone was standing at ease because of one man's presence. Major Higgins took a few steps closer to Lila. "Everything here is safe," he said in a calm voice. "You don't need to worry." The officers nodded, scanning the yard carefully. They noted the small foam target, the soft-tipped arrows, and the careful setup Lila had arranged. Everything looked orderly and controlled. One of the officers lowered his hand slightly from his belt, but remained alert, ready to act if needed. Lila felt a mix of relief and curiosity. She had never experienced such attention while practicing her hobby. She continued to stand with her bow, showing that she was calm and safe. The neighbors, now gathering quietly behind fences and windows, whispered among themselves. Some chuckled softly, realizing the danger was only a harmless hobby. Others watched in amazement at the respect the officers showed to Major Higgins. The unusual scene made the street feel alive with curiosity and excitement. One of the officers stepped forward cautiously. "So this is just a hobby?" he asked, looking at Lila. "Yes," Lila said, smiling. "I enjoy archery. It's safe and fun, and I always practice in my backyard. I make sure no one is around and that everything is controlled." Major Higgins nodded proudly. "She's responsible and careful." "There is no danger. You can see for yourself." The first officer nodded, lowering his hand completely. The second officer relaxed his shoulders, realizing that this report had been a misunderstanding. He glanced at the neighbors, who were now watching with amused expressions. Mrs. Callahan, still near her garden, took a deep breath. She realized that her reaction had caused more attention than necessary. She stepped forward, her voice soft. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "I thought it was dangerous," she admitted. Lila smiled gently. "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The important thing is that everyone is safe now." Major Higgins looked at the officers and nodded. "Thank you for checking, but you can rest assured. All is safe here." The officers gave small nods, acknowledging the situation. They shared a brief smile with each other, understanding that this was one of those unusual community moments where a misunderstanding had been resolved peacefully. Lila carefully picked up her bow again and aimed at her target. She let the arrow fly, hitting the center with a soft thump. The neighbors whispered and laughed quietly, realizing that what could have been a dramatic incident had turned into a funny, memorable story. Mrs. Callahan shook her head with a small smile, learning that sometimes calm thinking and checking facts first were better than panic. The street slowly returned to its usual peaceful rhythm, though now with a story everyone would remember and talk about for a long time. The neighborhood had almost returned to normal, but a quiet excitement lingered in the air. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and fences, curious to see how the unusual situation would unfold. Lila stood in her backyard, still holding her foam bow, while the officers looked on, listening attentively. Everything seemed calm, yet there was an air of anticipation. Major Higgins, the retired Army officer, stepped forward with a confident smile. His presence brought a sense of order and calm to the street. "Lila, your practice looks good today," he said, glancing at her neatly arranged targets. "And officers, thank you for coming to check. Safety is important, but so is understanding the situation before reacting." The officers nodded. They were used to responding quickly to emergencies, but they also understood the value of experience and guidance. Seeing Major Higgins present reassured them that everything was under control. Just then, Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, began pacing near her garden. Her earlier panic had faded slightly, but she still seemed flustered. "I just don't understand," she said quietly to herself. It looked dangerous. How could anyone not see that? Lila, noticing her neighbor's unease, called politely, "Mrs. Callahan, you don't need to worry. This is completely safe. I always check my surroundings and make sure no one is near. It's just a hobby." Mrs. Callahan hesitated but nodded slowly. She was beginning to see that her reaction had been unnecessary. Meanwhile, Major Higgins glanced at the officers with a subtle, knowing smile. He knew that this would be a moment they wouldn't forget. "Officers," Higgins said, his voice calm yet commanding, "please take a moment to see that everything here is safe. Lila has been practicing under supervision for weeks and her setup is carefully arranged. Observe the arrows, the target, and the distance from the street." The officers leaned forward slightly, studying the backyard with keen eyes. Everything was neat and organized. The arrows were foam-tipped. The target was small and light, and there was plenty of space around. There was truly no danger at all. Then, Higgins added with a gentle smile, "You may notice that she's disciplined, careful, and aware of her surroundings. This is exactly the kind of safe practice we encourage in our neighborhood." One of the officers raised an eyebrow and looked at Higgins. "Sir, we trust your judgment," he said politely. "It's clear that everything is controlled and safe." Higgins nodded and turned to Lila. "Go ahead and demonstrate. Just a single shot," he suggested. Lila picked up her bow again, smiled, and aimed carefully at her target. She drew the string back and released a soft arrow. It hit the center of the cardboard with a gentle thump. The sound echoed lightly across the quiet street, and the neighbors watching from their windows laughed softly, realizing how harmless the entire situation was. Mrs. Callahan gasped quietly, seeing that the bow was completely safe. I overreacted," she admitted softly, shaking her head. "I should have checked first." Major Higgins smiled kindly at her. "It's okay. Everyone learns sometimes. Today's lesson is about patience and observation. You did what you thought was best, and that is understandable." The officers, now relaxed, exchanged small smiles. They had seen many unusual situations in their careers, but this one stood out for its humor and lightness. They looked at Higgins and instinctively gave a small gesture of respect, acknowledging his experience and authority. At that moment, a few more neighbors stepped outside. They clapped softly as Lila aimed her second arrow, hitting the target dead center again. The street was filled with quiet laughter and cheerful whispers. What had started as a panic over a dangerous weapon had turned into a neighborhood lesson in safety, calm thinking, and community understanding. Even Mrs. Callahan, though slightly embarrassed, smiled and shook her head. "I can't believe I thought it was dangerous," she murmured. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that careful observation was far better than rushing to judgment. Lila lowered her bow, smiling. She felt grateful for the presence of Major Higgins, who had turned a tense situation into a peaceful and even fun moment. The officers nodded politely at her and Higgins, their respect clear in their gestures. The quiet neighborhood, once tense and filled with worry, now felt lively, cheerful, and safe again. Everyone realized that sometimes, even unusual events could bring neighbors together in understanding, laughter, and a shared sense of calm. The quiet neighborhood had grown even more curious as the situation unfolded. Neighbors peeked from windows and doorways, whispering softly among themselves. The sun shone warmly, casting gentle shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. Lila stood with her foam bow in hand, smiling politely at the officers and neighbors alike. She felt slightly embarrassed but mostly relieved that everyone now understood she was harmless. Major Higgins, the retired Army officer, stepped forward and addressed the officers. "You see, everything here is safe. Lila is following proper procedures, and this practice is completely under control." The officers, who had been cautiously observing the backyard, nodded in agreement. They lowered their hands from their belts and relaxed their shoulders. Still, their professional instincts kept them alert, ready to respond if anything unexpected happened. Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, shuffled closer, her expression a mix of relief and embarrassment. I can see now that it's nothing to worry about," she admitted softly. "I overreacted," Lila smiled gently. "It's okay," she said. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that no one is hurt, and now we all understand each other better." Major Higgins glanced at the officers with a quiet, knowing smile. "Officers, may I show you something?" he asked. They looked at him with curiosity. Higgins had always had a commanding presence, and the officers trusted his judgment completely. Without a word, Higgins raised his hand in a subtle but clear gesture. The officers instinctively straightened their posture. Their eyes followed his movements carefully, and then, in a perfectly synchronized motion, both officers snapped to attention. "Yes, Commander," they said in unison. The neighbors gasped in surprise, and Mrs. Callahan's mouth opened slightly. She had expected a normal police response, not this extraordinary display of respect and discipline. Lila blinked, unable to hide her astonishment. She had never imagined that practicing her hobby could lead to such a remarkable scene. Major Higgins smiled warmly at Lila. "See? Respect and training go a long way," he said. "These officers know I supervise safe activities in the neighborhood. They trust me to ensure everything remains controlled and harmless." The officers lowered their hands slowly, their expressions still serious but calm. They exchanged a quiet nod with Major Higgins, showing mutual respect and understanding. Lila felt a sense of relief wash over her. What had begun as a misunderstanding had transformed into a lesson in trust, safety, and community cooperation. Mrs. Callahan, still slightly flustered, stepped closer to Lila. I never expected this," she admitted. "I thought it was dangerous, but I see now that I was wrong. Thank you for showing us that it's safe." Lila smiled, setting her bow gently on the ground. "It's all right. The important thing is that we all learned something today. Safety, observation, and calm thinking can prevent unnecessary worry." The neighbors, now fully out of their houses, whispered excitedly and laughed softly. Some clapped quietly, impressed by the display of discipline and respect. The unusual scene had turned a simple misunderstanding into a story the neighborhood would remember for a long time. Major Higgins turned to the officers one last time. "Thank you for your professionalism," he said kindly. "And remember, clear communication and careful observation are just as important as quick action." The officers nodded once more. "Understood, Commander," one said, smiling politely. Lila picked up her bow again and aimed at the target. She released a soft arrow, and it hit the center with a gentle thump. The neighbors whispered and chuckled, realizing that what could have been a dramatic event had become a peaceful, even amusing neighborhood story. Mrs. Callahan shook her head with a small smile, acknowledging her mistake. "Next time I'll check first before reacting," she murmured. The neighborhood, once filled with tension and worry, now felt calm, cheerful, and connected. Everyone had learned an important lesson. Misunderstandings could happen, but respect, communication, and guidance could turn any situation into a positive experience. Lila smiled at the scene before her, feeling grateful for Major Higgins, the officers, and even Mrs. Callahan. Today, a quiet hobby had transformed into a moment of community learning, trust, and laughter that no one would soon forget. The quiet neighborhood had begun to feel alive in a new way. The earlier tension caused by the misunderstanding had faded, replaced by curiosity, amusement, and relief. Lila stood in her backyard, holding her foam bow gently, while Major Higgins and the officers observed her practice with calm interest. Even Mrs. Callahan had moved closer, her eyes wide with realization, trying to understand the full situation. Major Higgins glanced at Lila, smiling warmly. "Your practice today is excellent, Lila," he said. "You are careful, focused, and safe. That is why the officers trust you, and why the neighborhood should feel confident as well." Lila nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. I always make sure everything is safe. I only practice when no one is around, and I use these soft arrows. Nothing can get hurt." One of the officers stepped closer, speaking respectfully. "Ma'am, it is clear now that this is safe. We understand why you do this, and it seems like good exercise and fun as well." Lila smiled. "Yes, it is very relaxing. It helps me focus and feel calm, and I like knowing that I am improving every day." Mrs. Callahan, still slightly embarrassed, spoke softly. I think I misunderstood the situation. I thought you were doing something dangerous, but now I see it is safe. I should have looked first before calling the police." Major Higgins turned to her and nodded kindly. "It's understandable, Mrs. Callahan. Many people worry first and think later. But today is a lesson for all of us, Observing, asking questions, and checking facts can prevent misunderstandings. The neighbors, who had gathered at a safe distance, whispered among themselves. Some were smiling, others quietly laughing, realizing how a small incident had caused such excitement. Yet now they also seemed to feel inspired by the calm and respectful way the officers and Higgins handled the situation. Lila picked up a foam arrow and held it up. "See, these arrows are soft and safe. I only use them for practice. It's all harmless, and I always keep track of where they go." She carefully placed the arrow on the bow and aimed at the target. She released it gently, and it hit the center with a soft thump. The neighbors clapped quietly, appreciating her skill and safety. Major Higgins smiled at the group. "Notice how calm observation and guidance can turn a potential problem into a safe, controlled, and even enjoyable situation," he said. Everyone here had a reaction, but with patience and understanding it became a positive experience for the whole neighborhood. Mrs. Callahan nodded slowly, realizing the truth in his words. "Yes, I see that now. I should trust what I see and not react too quickly. It's a good lesson." The officers, still standing respectfully nearby, added quietly. "It is a good reminder for all of us. Sometimes even trained professionals can learn something new about calmness and observation." Lila set her bow down carefully. "I am glad everyone understands now. We can all enjoy the neighborhood safely and support each other. And maybe we can even learn from each other's hobbies and skills." The neighbors laughed softly at that, imagining future afternoons where they might watch Lila practice or even try archery themselves. Some whispered ideas about other safe activities they could enjoy in the backyard or in community areas. The incident, which began as a misunderstanding, was transforming into a story about community, learning, and respect. Mrs. Callahan approached Lila and Major Higgins. "Thank you for showing me today," she said sincerely. "I realize now that communication and calm thinking are more important than rushing to judgment." "I will remember this for the future," Major Higgins nodded. "Exactly. Today shows that patience, understanding, and safety can create positive experiences, even in moments of confusion." The officers smiled politely and waved to the neighbors. "All is safe here," one of them said. "We can leave knowing the situation is under control." Lila looked around at the smiling faces in the calm neighborhood. What could have been a stressful afternoon had turned into a peaceful, educational, and even fun event. She felt grateful for Major Higgins, for the officers, and even for the lesson Mrs. Callahan had learned. The neighborhood had grown closer in understanding, trust, and respect. As Lila aimed her bow one more time, she felt calm and happy. The soft arrow flew perfectly to the target. The gentle thump echoed across the lawn, a sound of peace, focus, and community harmony. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the neighborhood, highlighting the neatly trimmed lawns and colorful flower beds. The air was calm, yet alive with whispers of the recent excitement. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding had transformed into a lesson in safety, respect, and community connection. Lila stood in her backyard, holding her foam bow, smiling at the officers, Major Higgins, and the gathering neighbors. Neighbors, who had previously stayed behind windows or fences, now stepped out to watch the peaceful scene. Children peered curiously, whispering to each other about the foam bow and the impressive display of discipline by the officers. Even Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, seemed more relaxed, though she still fidgeted slightly with her hands, unsure how to fully recover from her earlier panic. Major Higgins approached Lila. "You've handled this wonderfully," he said with a kind smile. "By staying calm, careful, and confident, you've shown the entire neighborhood how to manage a hobby safely. People are learning from your example." Lila nodded politely. "I just wanted to practice and enjoy my hobby." "I didn't expect it would cause so much attention," she said with a small laugh. The officers, still standing respectfully nearby, added, "You did very well, Lila. You remained calm, cooperative, and safe. That is the best way to handle situations like this." Mrs. Callahan stepped closer, her expression serious but sincere. "I realize now that I overreacted," she admitted. "I should have checked carefully before assuming there was danger. I'm sorry for the panic I caused." Lila smiled gently. "It's okay. The important thing is that everyone is safe and understands the situation now. We all learned something today." Neighbors exchanged quiet nods and smiles. Some whispered about trying new hobbies safely, while others spoke about the importance of calm thinking and observing facts before reacting. The mood in the neighborhood had shifted from tension to connection, and a sense of shared understanding filled the air. Major Higgins turned to the officers. "Thank you for your professionalism," he said. "Even in a simple situation like this, your presence reassured the neighborhood and ensured safety." The officers nodded politely. "It is our duty to protect and serve," one said. "But today is also a reminder that calm observation and guidance can prevent unnecessary worry." Lila set her bow on the grass and aimed her arrow at the target one more time. The soft arrow flew through the air and hit the center perfectly. The neighbors clapped softly, not only for Lila's skill but also for the way the entire situation had been handled peacefully. Children giggled with excitement, whispering about trying archery themselves one day. Mrs. Callahan watched quietly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I have learned a lot today," she said. "I will remember to stay calm, check the facts, and trust that people can be responsible." Major Higgins nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Today shows that patience, understanding, and clear communication can turn misunderstandings into learning experiences. Everyone benefits from calm thinking and respect." The officers waved politely to the neighbors before returning to their car. "All is clear here," one said. "The situation is completely safe." Lila smiled at the neighborhood around her. What could have been a stressful day had become a memorable story that everyone would talk about for weeks. She felt proud of her calmness and grateful for the guidance of Major Higgins. Neighbors started returning to their homes slowly, smiling and whispering quietly about the unusual event. Some promised to try safe hobbies themselves, while others reflected on the importance of observation and patience. The community had grown closer through a shared experience, turning a simple misunderstanding into a moment of unity and learning. Mrs. Callahan finally approached Lila and Major Higgins together. "Thank you for showing me today," she said sincerely. "I see now that safety, calm thinking, and proper guidance are far more important than rushing to conclusions." Major Higgins smiled warmly. "Exactly. Today has been a lesson for the entire neighborhood. Calmness, understanding, and responsibility can transform any situation into something positive." Lila picked up her bow one last time, aiming carefully. The soft arrow sailed through the air and struck the target dead center. The gentle thump echoed across the quiet street, a sound that now symbolized not just her skill but the calm, understanding, and harmony of the neighborhood. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the lawns, Lila felt peaceful. Today, a simple hobby had created connection, respect, and laughter. The neighborhood had learned to work together, observe carefully, and appreciate each other's talents. What had started as a misunderstanding had turned into a day everyone would remember fondly. The neighborhood was calm once more. The earlier commotion had passed, leaving behind a feeling of warmth and understanding. Lila stood in her backyard, holding her foam bow gently, watching as the neighbors returned to their homes, still smiling and whispering quietly about the unusual event of the day. The sun cast a golden glow over the lawns, making the flowers and trees appear brighter than usual. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze on her face. She felt peaceful, happy, and grateful for the way the day had unfolded. What had begun as a small misunderstanding had turned into a story of learning, respect, and community connection. Major Higgins remained nearby, keeping an eye on the neighbors while giving Lila a reassuring smile. "You handled everything wonderfully today," he said softly. "Your calmness and attention to safety made all the difference." Lila nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to enjoy my hobby safely, and I didn't expect it would create so much attention." She glanced around, noticing Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, standing at a respectful distance. Mrs. Callahan approached slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I realize now that I overreacted earlier," she admitted quietly. "I should have taken a moment to check the facts. I'm grateful that everyone remained calm and handled the situation responsibly." Lila smiled gently. "It's okay. The important thing is that everyone is safe and has learned something from today. Mistakes happen, and now we all understand each other better." The officers had left a short while ago, returning to their duties, but the impact of their presence lingered. Their professionalism and respectful behavior, guided by Major Higgins, had reminded the neighborhood of the importance of calm observation and understanding. The unusual moment when they had saluted Higgins had become a memorable story, one that neighbors would tell with laughter and admiration for weeks to come. Children began to gather near Lila's backyard, their curiosity piqued by the foam bow and target. "Can we try archery too?" one of them asked shyly. Lila knelt down to their level, smiling warmly. "Of course," she said. "We can practice safely together, and I'll show you how to use the foam arrows. It's fun and completely safe if we follow the rules." The children's faces lit up with excitement. Major Higgins watched with amusement as the small group of neighbors learned to take careful aim and release soft arrows at the target. Lila guided them patiently, demonstrating each step with care and attention to safety. Mrs. Callahan observed quietly, a small smile forming on her face. She realized that today had taught her more than just caution. It had shown her the value of community, trust, and learning from one another. She even joined the group briefly, asking questions about the safe use of the arrows and listening carefully to Lila's explanations. The neighborhood felt alive in a gentle, joyful way. Conversations drifted across the lawns as neighbors shared stories and laughed softly. What had started as a tense and worrying situation had become a moment of connection and learning. Everyone seemed closer, more understanding, and more appreciative of each other's presence. Lila released another arrow, and it hit the target dead center. The soft thump echoed gently across the backyard, bringing a smile to everyone's faces. Even Mrs. Callahan clapped softly, acknowledging both Lila's skill and the peaceful resolution of the day's events. As the sun began to set, casting long, warm shadows over the lawns, Lila looked around at the calm and cheerful neighborhood. She felt a sense of pride, not just in her archery practice, but in the way the entire community had handled the misunderstanding. Respect, patience, and clear communication had turned what could have been a stressful day into a peaceful, joyful, and memorable experience. Major Higgins patted Lila on the shoulder. "Today will be remembered for more than just a foam bow," he said kindly. "It will be remembered for understanding, trust, and harmony." Lila smiled, feeling content. She carefully put her bow and arrows away, knowing that her hobby had become more than a personal pastime. It had brought the neighborhood together, teaching everyone a lesson in patience, calmness, and respect. The quiet street returned to its usual rhythm, filled with the gentle sounds of children laughing, birds singing, and neighbors talking quietly. But now it held a new energy, one of trust, learning, and community. And in Lila's backyard, the foam arrows and targets stood as a reminder that even small hobbies handled with care could create big moments of joy and connection. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and orange. Lila felt peaceful and happy. Today had been unusual, memorable, and full of lessons. The neighborhood had learned the value of calm thinking, observation, and trust. And as the day ended, everyone knew that